sound tapping on the glass as I lock the passenger door. Somehow we got in the back. Now I can't relax anymore. Last night got a hold of me. I can't wrestle free from my head. Sunlight banging on the wall, begging me for more promises. And I slip and I slide like a spider on an icicle, frozen in time. It's a trick of the light. I got a girl around the corner still trying to change my mind. Never in my wildest dreams did it occur to me to try to go to sleep. Wonder whether I will freeze when no Dr. Dusk comes to coffee room. Midnight I'm like her specialty. Chill I muscle me certain in the end. Midnight has got the hots for me, and I'm about to be born again. Love heart's heavy in her hands. Oh no, not again. New regrets. Rough start, but we all know that dance. Those old boots remember the steps. And I slip and I slide like a spider on an icicle, frozen inside. It's a trick of the light. I got a girl around the corner still trying to change my mind. Never in my wildest dreams did it occur to me to try to go to sleep. Wherever I go carries when no doctor dusk comes to comfort me. Midnight I'm like a specialty. Chill out muscle me certain in the end. Midnight has got the hots for me, and I'm about to be. I can still remember when your city smelt exciting. I still get a whiff of that aroma now and then. Burglary and fireworks, the skies they were alighting. Accidents and toffee drops and thinking on the train. Oh, he was young in the frost. No regard for the cost of saying his feelings in the moment they were felt. And if he was calm like you, locked up inside of your lips, then you know full well all he had to say was, All he had to say was goodbye. Summertime made promises it knew it couldn't keep. The fairy tale was climbing up a mountain for to see. Coloring the pictures with your royal hands. Now I'm craving heartbreak while you're making your demands. Oh, he was young in the frost, no regard for the cost of saying his feelings in the moment they were felt. And if he was calm like you, locked up inside of your looks and he know full well that all he had to say was, all he had to say was goodbye. If he was calm like you, locked up inside of your looks and he know full well, all he had to say was, all he had to say was goodbye. Thank you, everybody. This is my last song. Then let's start talking about MMOs. Get your questions ready, or just ask them already. I'll get to them. I don't like that version. I just sort of always feel sick without you, baby. I ain't got anything to lick without you, baby. Nothing seems to stick without you, baby. Ain't I falling in love? It's just the pits without you, baby. It's really just the pits without you, baby. It's like everyone's a dick without you, baby. Ain't I falling in love? And all my pals will tell me that I'm crazy. You bet I'm loopy, alright. And I just don't recognize this fool that you have made me. Whoa, I ain't seen him for a while. And as your shrinking figure blows a kiss, I catch and smash it on my lips. Darling, I can see completely for you. Really might be losing it. The idea that you've existed all along is ridiculous. Don't know what to say. Maybe we ought to fuck 7 years of that look at the power. Could I have made it any clearer? It's Love like a tongue in a nostril. Love like an egg in the jar. You're the first day of spring with a septum piercing. It'll be a sweet dream. Hello and welcome everybody to the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am Nerd Slayer, your host, or NS, or Justin, depending on how much you know me or what you prefer to call me. I'm still a little bit under the weather, but I'm feeling better than I was. And the Champions Online video just came out a few days ago, so we're going to start talking about that from the top. Also talk about any MMO questions anybody has. Also, there's been a lot of new game news, like Diablo 4 stuff, like some games getting new patches and seasons, like Apex and Call of Duty and all of that stuff. I've also been working on the Gwent script for the Death of a Game. I'm probably like a little over halfway, so you guys will probably see that within a week or so. So yeah, there's the update where I'm at. What about you guys? What's up with you? How was your previous week? I believe this is the last week of February. Yeah, that was me singing. I'm just warming up my voice. Because usually when I wake up and do the VO, if I haven't came back from training, I'm just waking straight up. So my voice sounds worse than it already sounds because I'm sick, but hey, how's it going, Jarcorn, Des, ZB, Ricard, Destin, Magister, see Magister a lot. Felday, I don't think I've seen Felday before. No, Limpos is here. Yeah, Limpos is a thief in the night, man. And you don't know when he's not here. But anyway, so I want to talk about the Death of a Game on Champions Online. So for those who hadn't seen it, or aren't aware of it, I did a Death of a Game on Champions Online. Now, for a little bit of backstory, Champions Online is it was supposed to be the spiritual successor / sequel title to City of Heroes, and most people might not know that because the games play nothing alike, besides being superhero games. They're fairly different. But they were utilizing the same company, at least at the time, Paragon Studios. Cryptic Studios, which later became Paragon Studios when they took over control of City of Heroes, and the company seemingly kind of split. Some of it went to Atari, which was the Cryptic part, and then the Paragon part went to... they had their own company, but they were still published by NCSoft, which is where the tragic sunsetting happened, and they shut down that game. That kind of happened in the parallel beginning of Champions Online. So many people feel like Champions Online is the reason this game failed. Some people blame Champions Online for being a reason Cryptic Studios handled the City of Heroes situation the way that they did. Some people feel that way. So it already had this like negative stigma surrounding it. Sorry. But it's more than that. It's actually the game itself. So when Cryptic Studio got the licensing to do Star Trek Online, they subsequently got the licensing to do a Marvel Heroes game, or sorry, Marvel online game. Marvel Heroes is a different project. And then the third one was Neverwinter. So Cryptic got all three of these IPs at the same time and was working on them at the same time. And I've gotten confirmation from developers at Cryptic that they were absolutely working on them simultaneously. So for those kind of curious about that, if you care at all, they were. Whoops. There it goes. They were, which meant that, you know, there were going to be some limitations of those three games. But also, it's why Cryptic Studios has essentially the same three games with just three different IPs. Like, seriously, I really recommend anybody who doesn't understand engines or gameplay as much, or maybe like development, and you're kind of hearing me and just thinking, yeah, it's just your opinion. I recommend you go play Champions Online, then go play Star Trek Online, then go play Neverwinter Nights Online. Why do these games play so similar? They're utilizing the same engine. Now, that's not that big of an issue, right? Like, many games utilize the same engine, but how come they don't play the same way? Well, because how they arrive at that engine is actually fairly different. Most of these companies are utilizing an engine like Unreal or Unity and having to reverse engineer it to make it work for an MMO. So how they're coming at that solution, unless they're utilizing the same person, which many of the big MMOs do, it's going to be different. So, question for the CO video, I may have missed this, but before City of Heroes shut down, what were the numbers it was pulling in compared to its successor? So there's no hard data on Cryptic Studios' games because they don't want there to be. Like, I'm sorry, like, anytime someone is really completely resistant to having any kind of data on their game, their online RPG, or their MMO, it's basically not a good reason. There's never a good reason why to keep those numbers a secret. It's just for profit incentive, basically, because most people don't want to play a game when they feel like it's dead. Which is why people hate my videos sometimes, because they feel like I'm killing the game or whatever. So it's hard to know that exactly, but basically Champions Online was never a serious contender, and was never a serious factor when compared to City of Heroes. In fact, I think you can very easily figure out this number, because just think about this for a second. Cryptic bragged about Champions having 1 million players with no specification on what those 1 million players are and what constitutes a player. So that's the problem with this kind of data, and people will hit this on my videos all the time. Well, Nerd Slayer, you don't have the actual population data. It's like, I know. Nobody else does either. So you're not making any argument by saying that. And so by me just not making the argument, then nobody's making argument. So I have to make the best argument I can and present it, which is based off the numbers that I can get, which are usually limited in some sort of way. With Champions, the game bragged about 1 million players, which means that active would be much less than that. And considering the game was completable in 2 months, probably even less than that. So now compare that to the numbers that came out concerning City of Heroes, which were reverse engineered, by the way. And people said that there were at least between 300,000 to 700,000 subscribers during the shutdown period where they shut down City of Heroes. To put that into order of magnitude, that's not players, guys. That's subscribers in a freemium game, which means that imagine how many players were playing the game as well. Not just the ones that were paying for it, right? Because that's just how statistics work. So it's just like, just imagine that. It's like, there's order of magnitudes more players were playing City of Heroes and interested in that game, and it had way more impact on the industry at large. And I want to talk about that for a second. Thank you for asking that question, Corn. I believe that was Corn. But that's why, like, if it seemed like I had a bit of a bone to pick with Cryptic by the end of that video, it should have felt like that. And it's because they picked 3 of the best IPs that you can pick and made 3 of the most forgettable and boring MMOs. Now, again, I know people here are going to say, I like Star Trek Online. I like Neverwinter Nights Online. I like, you know, Champions Online. Okay, cool. But why don't we compare those to each of their competitors? Why don't we just do that? How about, like, let's just start there, right? Like, that's what you do in competition and in business, right? You just compare people to their direct competitors. Okay, let's just do that.
Star Trek, let's compare it to Star Wars. Is it better than Star Wars Galaxies? Like, there's nothing fucking sandbox in the game. Is it better than SWTOR? Literally, in what planet would it ever be better than fucking SWTOR? And that's one of my most favorite and hated games at the same time. But on what planet, what galaxy, what nebula does Star Trek Online outperform SWTOR? Voice acting? No. Combat? No. Visuals? No. Gameplay? No. Space combat? No. Literally. What is it better at it exactly? And again, you can say, well, in my opinion, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fair enough. But I'm saying, like, you know, look at it from kind of like a general perspective. What does it do that's any better? It doesn't do anything better because it wasn't trying to be. It was trying to just milk as much as it could from its own audience without actually having to compete. And that's what I can't stand about Cryptic Studios and MMOs. And I'm going to make a video about this probably because it's been bothering me. That's their legacy, is basically the value bin MMO maker is the legacy of Cryptic Studios. Their games have no legacy. What will they be remembered for? What will you remember a Cryptic Studios game for that's not City of Heroes? And you could say that this is the curse of making a really fucking good game as your first game, but I think it's the curse of arrogance more than that, because it's not the same team that was working on those games. The same team that made Paragon Studios went and, you know, dipped out in other places. They didn't just go get absorbed back into Cryptic Studios. Cryptic Studios was utilizing different developers, different teams. And one of those developers and leaders was reportedly very hated. So, which was something that I didn't really talk about much in my video. So let's compare another, you know, Champions Online. Let's compare it. Why was Champions Online so maligned compared to City of Heroes? Is it just nostalgia? No, it's not. It's not nostalgia. What it is that Champions Online was a game that's constructed as walking from one theme park to the next theme park. Now, many games are designed this way. The problem is that they have a lot more going on in the games. Raids, dungeons, other ways to participate in content. In Champions Online, you didn't really even have dungeons. There's nothing to do essentially in-game except be your character that you created with this awesome character creator and really cool like costume selector and so on and so forth. But then you can't even roleplay because there's no world. There's no actual world to live in and navigate through, walk through, so on and so forth. And people would complain that, well, City of Heroes takes place primarily in a city. And that's boring because it's the same kind of stuff over and over again. That's a fair criticism. But the solution in Marvel Online, aka Champions Online's case, was to just make theme parks that you'll never revisit. And that's not really a better solution. Like, maybe there's like an argument that it could be better in some respects, but it didn't work out that way. And it wasn't. So I think it's pretty interesting and alarming because it shows you when you make an MMO for profit-driven reasons versus when you make one just for the love of trying to create an awesome superhero MMO, look at the difference of those two approaches. Yeah, Box said, I mean, that's actually a great point. Champions Online was an attempt to copy themselves without copying themselves because they sold the rights to their last game and just lost the rights to the game they were making. So, yeah, it's Champions Online really is just such an interesting project for me, but it's also like, you know, I've always had this like sneaky suspicion that it's something that I hated. And of course I played it and tried it, and you know, it was a very forgettable game, unfortunately, because there's just not much content and longevity in a game like that. It's just a game, it's not a world. You know, after playing City of Heroes and going to Champions Online, it just felt like you were playing like the little brother version of it. So I think that Cryptic has kind of exhausted any of that like goodwill or like care about them as a company, because anytime I even see them mentioned now, it's usually negative. So it goes to show you that like that approach of trying to make the short-term revenue and profit just doesn't really work in the MMO space. Because like, sure, it might work again in a short-term way, but then what? Are you going to be around to keep making MMOs? Like, doesn't seem like it. I haven't heard anything from Cryptic. They got acquired again. There hasn't been a word on any of their. So that because that's probably their legacy. that's the end of the road for them in terms of that's what they will be remembered. And I know that many American companies especially don't care about that because it's very profit driven society. But I think that it's also important when constructing a world to understand that it is different than constructing a game. And by not respecting those rules is why your game doesn't work. Your world doesn't work. Because Champions Online was never a world. It was just a game. And games can be forgotten. And games people log off of. And games people get bored of. But MMOs and online worlds and communities are another world where you can make friends and create new relationships, explore new parts of another world and parts of yourself. So there's this big transformative experience that comes from MMOs. And again, there's a lot that goes into making them. Not only are they difficult to make, they're difficult to upkeep because you have to keep developing them and developing them in a live context, because there's no gift of, well, this world's been functioning now for thousands of years and hundreds of thousands of years. So like we already have the rules set in place. In a world that's constructed, you need to actually construct those rules and then enforce them. And so sometimes some developers adopt this approach where it's like after things start happening, they don't change any of their. And I found that interesting about Cryptic Studios is that people talk about the patch that happened after Champions Online launched and how the game got more difficult. And they say that that's like a bad thing. But the interesting thing about that is that if you're wondering why the developers did that, it's because they realized they didn't have enough content. They had to make it harder. That's the only time I've ever seen developers in any MMO context make the difficulty higher for the launch, or at the launch, is whenever they realize we don't have enough. SWTOR did the opposite thing, which was incredibly stupid, and it bit them in the ass. Like they lost what, like 1 million subscribers or something like that in the first year for doing shit that's stupid like that. But well, that's the problem I have, Drowercorn, with Cryptic Studios games, and why I don't really feel like any negative like stigma from bashing them, is because like they literally constructed a game that's made to be monetized in a theme park fashion and then never built anything in the theme park. It's why you hear me literally get insulting towards them. The end of the video is because literally their design is, let's construct a fucking theme park, which means that my content, it has a shelf life. Always remember that. When you think the words theme park, think shelf life. Those should go hand in hand. You can't ride the same ride 100 times. You just can't. Nobody does that. Like, not even achievement players even do that kind of stuff. They play as long as they need to get what they need. They don't keep playing and playing and playing and playing and playing. Nobody really plays that way. I mean, gonna wait for Riot's MMO, I guess. It's gonna be free to play 100%. There's probably a good chance it will be. And I actually have a pretty good idea that they're gonna do a pretty good job. That's the thing, Des, is that literally you're designing your game as a subscription-based theme park game, and then you don't come out with any content. It's like literally what goes through these developers' head to think that like the player base would allow themselves to just get nickel and dimed while expecting nothing in return. Like that's the sad thing is that as these games have shifted away from subscription-based MMOs, developers have become less accountable. And that's the shitty part, is that players are happy about it because they're like, these games are free now, I get to play them. They're free, but there's always a cost, guys. Nothing is ever free. So what might be free for you is going to cost you in some sort of way. It's going to cost you in terms of time that you. It's going to cost somebody else because they could just buy something. Theme park MMOs are like theme parks in the northern US. Good for 3 to 5 months a year, then close while they're waiting for the next one. Yeah, so Lost Street, that to me, literally objectively confirmed that is a for-profit company that doesn't give a fuck about making a good game. And I truly feel I can't be argued on that, and I'll tell you why. Why would a developer on a dying game that nobody fucking plays anymore remove the only thing that players can do to create content for themselves? Literally, what is the only reason you would ever do that? Think about that for a second. Because then those people aren't buying your content updates anymore. They're not buying your little quest packs. They're not paying for all your nickel and dime services. They're just playing within their own little ecosystem and creating their own fun. Oh no, the fucking massive like tragedy. They're having fun on their own and I can't monetize it. Actually, you could have. You guys are just fucking stupid. Like, I'm sorry. Cryptic. You're telling me you guys couldn't have monetized the fucking Foundry system? Or the quest creation systems? You couldn't have, I don't know, made it a subscription fee? Like, how dumb are you guys? Like, that was one of the biggest fucking mess ups I've ever seen. And the only reason they did it for monetization, and it's not even a fucking good monetization change. It's not even good. They could have made money off of that. Like, just like, I can't stand Cryptic Studio. Anyway, I feel the same way that I feel about them as like Tryon fucking Worlds, which is probably how people feel about it. But that's the thing is like, you know, whenever I push back on these sorts of games, the thing is like, people, guys, I have no issue with theme park centric game, meaning a game that wants to basically give no tools to the player to create content on their own. As long as they're creating enough content for you, then who fucking cares, right? That's the idea. The problem is that's a faulty premise. And I want to make a video about that. Something that like many developers and players especially, because remember, players dictate what developers have to do. Because if players are educated, developers have to be more educated. Because if players can sense and smell out, wait a minute, this game's not massive. Why do you keep marketing it like that? Developers will have to be like, well, shit, I have to make massive games now. Oh, fuck, I actually have to make a big game, a massive game. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it helps dictate that. So the more educated the fan base is, the better that they can actually push for change and expectations for games that come out and be like, hey, we want this game to have exploration. It's lacking. We want this game to have story. We want this game to have multiple ways to play the starter zones. You know, these are things that people always talk about. It's true that most players don't want to be better educated, or people don't want to be better educated in general in America. It's a serious problem, unfortunately. Anti-intellectualism is also like literally a thing that the country itself espouses. But it's more than that. It's that if the player base that plays MMOs becomes more educated, and I'm talking about the core player base, because the core player base generally is educated, but they're not like as educated as they could be. And I'm talking about concepts like, you know, I'm somebody who has spent a lot of time playing MMOs, 21 years to be exact, and spent, you know, at least 7 to 10 of those alpha and beta testing pretty much all the major projects, and then of course also spent time working with developers, working in development, working on my own project, so on and so forth. But that's not where the biggest insight that I would say that I offer even comes from. And I know that might sound really weird, but like, hear me out for a second. I even talk to clients about this that I work with, which is just like, it's one thing to have a lot of knowledge about a specific type of game and a specific kind of genre, but it's another thing to understand what has been done before, what's being done, and what could be done better. That's more of a macro perspective look at the entire industry. And to do that, you have to have an understanding of more than just video games. You have to understand business. You have to understand product development. You have to understand how to make things sell, how to supply and demand work. Like, these are not incredibly complex topics, but the point is that you have to understand a little bit of economics, a little bit of business. And Ralph Koster has a quote about this, by the way, that to make an MMO, you kind of have to know a little bit of all of the really important things that go into constructing, which is going to be economy, there's going to be sociology, there's going to be ecology, right? The environment itself. And those are 3 pretty big things and fields in their own right that people dedicate their entire lives to learning and are incredibly complex. And it's not to say that like as an MMO developer, you need to know all of this, but you should at least be consulting with these people. Consult with an economist. Consult with somebody who knows how to construct an environment. Because the problem is that developers aren't doing that. And in the more recent games, none of that is happening. Because the world isn't being created anymore. Final Fantasy XIV isn't much of a world. I know it's one of, you know, everyone's favorite game or whatever at the moment, but I will very clearly tell everybody, and I will clearly explain to you why it's not much of a world. There's not much permanence in the world. There's not much longevity in us doing the content that you do every cycle, essentially. There's not much reason besides the few mini games and costume focuses to really be in the world other than that, effectively. And mini games are like that. I'm not just picking on Final Fantasy XIV. Guild Wars 2 feels like that. World of Warcraft feels like that. ESO feels like that. Many of these games feel like playing with other players is almost something that you just do when you feel like it. And that topic and that subject and concept might seem controversial, but it goes into my point about having to understand different aspects. So I understand a little bit of business. Something else I had to understand in order to understand MMOs and to navigate through life is understanding socialization. I talked about this on one of the podcasts before, but socialization is a really important concept to understand when building a world, because humans are social creatures, which means that they're going to be social with each other. The problem becomes when very antisocial people have joined the industry and genre space because they were essentially attracted by players or developers just trying to make more money than necessarily make their game better. And I can give you direct arguments for why. And that comes across as basically having a player base that wants everything in your game. It's why, like, one of the most common things you see these days when a new MMO comes out is, oh, but it only is for these kind of players. Like a new PvP MMO comes out, people are like, but it's only for PvP players. Like, oh my god. It's like, yeah. That's okay. Are you 10 years old and can't experience art for yourself and realize that art is also experienced for other people? Like, I know that everyone's mature enough to understand. So it's like, why are people having that reaction, that visceral reaction? It's not for me. It's because there's no games coming out. There's no MMOs coming out. So people are getting so bitter that, like, now that any fucking MMO comes out, all the player base feels like it has to be for me. It's for me. This really weird, like, toxic fan base, yes, but also like this deep entitlement. And I'm sorry, I see it a lot in PvE players where they have to feel like every game has to be designed for them. It actually doesn't. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can shit talk the game all you want and say it's not for you. But you don't have to complain about it being for you and then trying to get them to change it so it is for you. It's like, literally, that is the problem with the fucking industry, guys. The number one complaint I get about the common MMOs that are out now is how come they all play the same and they all feel the same? Because the developers listened to those people who kept complaining and saying, hey, I just wanted to have everything. I wanted to be for everybody. I wanted to have all difficulty levels. I wanted to be fair for everyone. And it's like, if you get that in the end, guess what happens? It's all one color, guys. It's just gray. All of it's grayscale all the way through. We don't want that. We literally don't want that. So we actually want MMOs to design worlds that are controversial. Not on purpose, but because worlds must be controversial. That's what creates content, dynamic content, right? Tribalism. All these things that you try to avoid and stamp out in real society, you amp these up in an MMO because you're playing a fucking video game, okay? So you focus on the social aspects of that. How do you get people to work together? Factions, that's the easiest way. Okay, developers figured that out. How do you get them back into working into individual groups, though? You can't leave them in faction. Think about that for a second socially. You leave players in factions, how can they be individual? That's the problem in many of these current games that have faction systems for PvP, and that's all they have. It was the easiest way to do it, but it was done by DAOC in like 2002. Better than it's being done in 2023. And I'm sorry, but I know everybody wants me to play Guild Wars 2's PvP, especially the world versus world. But guys, what does Guild Wars 2 PvP in world versus world offer me anything that Dark Age of Camelot didn't offer me, besides the actual combat itself? I'm here to burst everybody's bubble. Literally nothing. It's literally worse in every single aspect in world PvP. It has less mechanics, it has less progression, it has a smaller world, it's fucking instanced, it has repeatable mechanics that have essentially no permanence to them. There's no PvPvE overlaps, actually trying to involve all the players together. They're all segmented into their own zones and worlds. Like Guild Wars 2, I love the game and I love Guild Wars as a franchise, but it is the de facto, like, I want a piecemeal experience. Which is great, but like Des is saying, there's literally no fucking incentive to world versus world because it's a completely different zone that players don't care about unless it's just the bragging rights for PvP. Which, I'm sorry, is never going to be enough to affect the population at large. And I feel like even people like Zero Sense, who's a big world versus world player, would agree there. For most players, they care about that. They need to feel it in their chest, right? What does that mean? Dark Age of Camelot had a dungeon that had to be conquered by a faction to be utilized. So whenever it was conquered, you could go PvE there. So even if you weren't a PvPer, you still wanted your PvPers to PvP. So it's just like, essentially the faction system, and Boxhead also accounts for another reason why the faction system's problematic. It leads to unbalanced servers, especially in just 2 faction systems, but even now in 3 faction systems. So you take that into consideration. Ask yourself this from an intellectual perspective, a logical perspective, a smart perspective, you're a nerd perspective, whatever you would like to call it. Then why are the faction systems being operated in the same way? It's because it's easier that way, guys. There's no other reason. Don't let people convince you otherwise. When I sat in New World's office and I sat there and said, hey, you guys need to actually build these factions to be like unique and want to like be controversial at the same time. Look at what Secret World did. The Dragon faction, anarchy, wildness, the fucking Templars, order, and like fucking doing things by the book. Like, these were controversial. People hated these and loved them at the same time. But in New World, the factions are literally just a coat of paint and a visual identifier. What is a faction? What does it even mean? Like, Witcher is one of my favorite series, and Witcher 2 is my favorite game by far. And the way that they handle the Scoia'tael and the factions and how you really see the both sides of the conflict. With Scoia'tael, you're like, okay, they're kind of fucking unhinged. But then they're also like, I mean, they're literally getting killed and murdered because of their race. You see what I'm saying? So it's like seeing these, like, that's what we need in MMOs. We need that level of complexity of faction systems where it's like, you don't know which faction is the good guy, but you know which one you like. Right? We've just let these companies come out with PvP systems, and it's not just PvP that faction systems exist. In fact, I think that's part of the problem is faction systems have only become vehicles for PvP, when previously what a faction system also consisted of, and what I'm trying to make in my game, is like basically one that also helps you get started in the world. They teach you how to play. They give you basic gear. They give you a place to just feel like, you know what, like even if I go to the zone, I'm gonna have some of my teammates there and I'm gonna feel okay. Like, I'm gonna be safe. That's what factions should be, making people feel. Just you throw on a color of paint, throw on a jersey, and then suddenly you're green team, you know? Nobody gives a fuck about that. There's no permanence, there's no care about any of that. I'll use WoW as an example since Des brought it up. Why did I hate Battle of Azeroth so much that I made a video about it? Because Battle of Azeroth was just that. It was sold on this battle for Azeroth and the 2 factions fighting each other in true warfare. And then it was like when it came out, it was like fucking a wet pool noodle, you know? Because it's like you had to queue, you had to say that you wanted to queue, and you actually wanted to PvP, and then put yourself in the warpath, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then like, it's just like, that's not war. Like, I know people hate me saying this kind of stuff because I both take real war, world conflict and war and combat stuff seriously, but it's like, war ain't consensual. Like, literally, it's not consensual. So if you're in a war or in a fucking battle zone, like in an RVR lake in DAOC or in Warhammer Online, it isn't consensual anymore. You consented when you walked in the battlefield, right? And I know people can hear this, and a lot of they have negative experiences from when they got bullied in real life, when they've gotten bullied online, from when they got bullied in a PvP game, and that stuff comes to the surface. And it might sound like I'm dismissing that, but as somebody who literally trains people who don't know how to defend themselves, I actually take it seriously. But the problem is that people use it as an argument to then say, well, this shouldn't be allowed. Because that's what my title of the video was for this stream, and what I didn't get into last podcast, but what I wanted to is that, guys, we need to stop blaming fucking systems or concepts when the systems are broken. Let me repeat that. We need to stop blaming concepts when the systems are fucking broken, okay? Does the education system in the entirety of the world not work, or in specific regions? Or is it the specific education systems, not the concepts, right? Does education as a concept work? Like, I know I'm making an obvious argument, like a fucking course, like education as a concept is the most important thing. The institutions give you the systems. The systems then give you the processes to take that data in. So what that means in simple speak is that just because you've encountered a car that when it's red and it has a muffler, it's incredibly loud and obnoxious, does not mean every car that you ever encounter that is red will be obnoxious. But your brain tells you that because it's helpful to classify things as we do as humans. So your brain will have that reaction. Red cars are typically loud and they're going to be obnoxious. Maybe even just pick a motorcycle. But like, I've also been around motorcycles that are not. I've also been around bikes that are quiet. I've also been around cars that don't make loud noises like that. So like the idea is that your perception can be wrong sometimes, but it's helpful to have perception because they help you very quickly identify whatever something is or isn't. And even if you're wrong, you can always change your perspective on it. So to go into an example, the number one thing I fucking hate in the MMO industry, and this is coming from content creators do this too, I'm sorry, but they'll say, oh, this particular thing doesn't work because of this, while doing nothing to change the system, to change the parameters of the system or the environment, and to address it like an actual fucking problem, right? So let's explain. Oh, the leveling experience disappeared because it's just so boring, you know? Leveling's just boring. Shouldn't be boring. That's not good. Don't blame the concept of leveling, okay? It's what these games are fucking built on and were originally built on. Whether you went the Deku Mud route, like we talked about last time, or you went the D&D, those were the two big routes. Leveling experiences as a concept aren't always bad. Everybody loves SWTOR's leveling. Like the leveling experience. Warhammer, I love making a new character. Amazing leveling. Leveling experiences as systems have gotten. The concept of it is not bad. The concept is needed. It teaches you how to play the game. It introduces you to the world and the rules of the world. It helps you explore new places and new worlds and new things, right? Sorry, I'm going away from my mic. I need to turn my mic up a little bit. I'm not really sure why my mic volume isn't so loud right now. It could be I need to, I'm sick, so I'm not chest voicing as much as you can see. But here, let me know if that helps a little bit. I turned my mic up a few notches. Let me know if that helps. Yeah, I don't care if you guys are Nazi-ish. Well, okay, well, definitely don't be a Nazi to me because I'm Jewish. I set myself up unintentionally for that joke. I'm sorry. I meant, okay, I meant you can be very militant. You can be very militant and telling me about, about the about the voice settings, okay? Uh, alrighty. All right. Yeah. My ancestors already dealt with that in the Spanish side of things. So yeah, please, no more trauma. Also, you aren't fixing the problem neither. Well, first off, fixing the problem neither isn't a correct sentence, but to go into what you're talking about here, I'm not a developer with a massive amount of money or a publisher backing me. I'm a developer with no money backing me. So I'm making a game as slow as I can, which means that someday I will be able to say that, but it's not my argument and I don't need it to be my argument because I've sat in the room with other developers, including the biggest developers in the industry, and heard what they've said about my ideas, know what they think about my perspective, and I get paid to literally consult people and have been invited to every single major MMO development testing process. So it's like I used to get really like a lot of people suffer, especially in America, from imposter syndrome. But if you want to talk about MMOs and game development surrounding them, nothing will ever convince me that I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, because you actually have to sit there and engage with me in an argument and make me feel that way. And nobody's done that yet. So, but that's kind of why I feel that way, is that I talk so much about it because I'm also willing and allowing anybody to feel free to join the conversation and tell me what I'm saying is wrong or tell me how I'm saying it is wrong. But the truth is that, nobody does that on my videos. Nobody's calling me out on my knowledge. Nobody's calling me out on my expertise. Nobody's actually talking to my contacts that are in the industry. I've had none of them ever tell me anything. Like, you know, I'm still getting paid to do consulting. I'm still getting contacted by developers to do consulting. So like, that's how I know that whatever I'm saying or whatever I'm doing is working, right? Now, to address the part you saying about how it doesn't actually like change anything, the thing is that developers are the ones in developing it. What does that in itself actually mean? Anybody can start developing a game, but developing an MMO takes the biggest budget out of all of game development and is the most complicated of the game types. So it's not really an own to tell somebody, oh wow, you're not an MMO developer, when one of the most prominent MMO developers has told me personally, who's worked on every SOE project, that the majority of MMO developers now working in the space have never worked on MMOs. So again, feel free to continue, but I think you can kind of see it. I mean, there's really no point in like what you're arguing there. I have an audience of 300 and something thousand subscribers. I have over 10 million views. The idea that besides just working directly with developers that I wouldn't have an impact on things is just like a sad delusional reality that you should probably exit, is all I'm saying. Because I'm not trying to say that you should only listen to my opinion, but if you're not going to argue against what I'm saying, then I can pretty much easily just dismiss whatever you say because there's not much value to it. And that's what I'm very focused on, is adding value to the industry. That's why developers work with me. That's why developers talk to me behind the scenes. That's why they give me the scoop on whatever game I'm covering. It's because I am offering value, right? Like, if I was just being negative, if I was just being like, these games suck, fuck these games, like da-da-da, and offering no actual value, no way forward, no how can we make it better? You know, Josh Strifeface has talked about this before too, but I agree with him. Even in person, I've told him that I think if for creators like us, it's literally our job to educate everybody because the developers aren't doing it. So it actually is our job to educate. Did you ever watch live streams for Star Trek Online? What was your opinion about their work? So Star Trek Online, my feelings about them are going to be incredibly biased because I can't stand the game. I hate the tools that they use to construct the game too, because it literally feels like, if I had to describe Star Trek Online as an MMO, it's like an MMO existing inside of a studio capsule apartment in Japan. And no offense to capsule apartments, they're very affordable, but that's how I feel about it. When I feel like the world of Star Trek Online, it feels like it's like a little capsule apartment compared to a game like Star Wars Galaxies that had planets you could actually visit, live on, visit locations, see all the iconic characters and talk to them. And you know, it's just a different world, really. Like, and I wish that Star Trek was a better game, because I think that Star Trek has one of the best universes to make an MMO, period. But alas, they barely have any games, period. So they should probably just start with making good games in the Star Trek universe first. Get back to that, and then maybe make an MMO. Yes, I'm making a game, but it's a very slow process, because basically I've decided to take the Richard Garriott approach, which is construct a bunch of Ultima RPG titles up into creating Ultima Online. That's the same approach I'm going to take. So my MMO will come out in a long time. But the single player games in the same universe, utilizing the same world, technology, and concepts, that is what we're focused on doing at the moment. And so the GDD is still being completed, because this is literally like a new idea that I kind of came up with, because I just decided, you know what? I really want to use the single player experiences and single player games that I can make as a way to test my own skill, get more experience making and shipping games, even if they're single player, getting more feedback, but more specifically utilizing a single player game in which investigating and exploring is the purpose. I can give you that much information, to use that as a vehicle to actually explore and explain the world itself. I think that's something that's just missing in MMOs at the moment. And of course, if I just had the budget to do this, I could just do it. So to the people that are just like, why don't you just develop a game? It's like, come on. At least like look up a basic game developer class, or just look up basic information of what goes into making a game itself. Money does. And someone like me can barely afford even living. So how can I afford game development at some large scale, right? It's why I do it freestyle. I work with people that are talented, but we work slow. We're taking our time, but I really want to use those single player games as a way to kind of take the Dragon Quest Yoshi P approach and make it feel like you're playing an MMO, but basically make it 100% a single player game. Crosscode is another good example, if you guys have played Crosscode, and make it to where by the time people get to the MMO, they're going to be really excited to go see these locations again and see these characters and see these concepts, and I want to make a new character in this world. And so that's the concept I'm going for. But again, we're talking about a 10-15 year down the road like process. Like in my head, it could take 10-15 years before I ever launch an MMO. So even if it was a smaller scale one, because I'm not even saying that I'm going to go grand scale, I'm actually going to go 2D. The single player game will be 2D. But the goal is that if I can be successful enough, again, goals are, you know, things that you hope happen, then I can construct a world in 3D and make that the MMO. But at this rate, I'm just happy with having an MMO, period. So even if it ended up being 2D, strictly 2D, or 2.5D, which is probably what it would end up being, I would be okay with that too. Anyway, I'm not going to talk more about that because I still have a lot of work, as I said, to do on it myself. But the idea, this is my first time talking about it public now, is coming to fruition, and you guys will be hearing more about it soon. Because our goal with this is to make a playable demo before I ever even ask for a penny from anybody. So everybody will have the chance to see what we have in store and what kind of world we're trying to create, even in a single player game, for free. And then, of course, whenever I actually start to, you know, create the development processes, the budgeting, and all that kind of stuff, then, you know, Kickstart or whatever other options I end up going for funding, early access. I'm not sure like about any of that stuff, but that's really important to me, is that I want the core demo experience to be really fun, and everyone on my channel be talking about how much fun it is, before I ever sell anything, ask for money, ask for funding, or ask for it. And that's why I'm taking that approach. Like, many people don't take that approach, guys. Like, look at how many Kickstarters have been started by teams with no experience recently, even just the past 5 years. I don't want to take that approach. I don't want my name to be on the line and not feeling like I can actually fulfill what I want to fulfill. So for me, that means I'll take my time. Minutes, hours, you get the idea. Bit awkward to use. Oh, wait, YouTube has clipping? Huh, I didn't even know that. It was a pleasure meeting you. Good luck getting canceled. Thanks, Blackjack. I'm not the only Jew to ever make a Jewish joke. H3H3 makes plenty. In fact, one of his jokes actually did make him get banned, now that I think about it, but... Your ego's out of control. Well, Sam White, I would say the same about you. I think your ego's out of control because your only contribution in the chat so far has been to basically just denigrate me or shit on me. But you've offered nothing of value, essentially. So I hope that's clear to anybody else that feels that way. But that's how I feel, and you won't change my mind, unless you actually could, right? Anime PFP complains something or claims something inaccurate. I mean, it's just people are they care a lot about things, but I think what's often missing, especially in America, is that people care a lot, but there's no actual like backing of anything from it. Like, have you guys read any literature? Anybody talking about any of this stuff? Like, have you guys read any stuff from Richard Garriott, you know, Ralph Koster, Richard Bartle? If you haven't, why are you having an intellectual discussion about something someone else not understanding? It's kind of like going into psychology and not reading, like, I don't know, Meditation from Eckhart Tolle, or like, you know, Sigmund Freud's Sexual Attraction, or whatever. Like, you know, you read like Jung's fucking INTJ, MBTI, whatever. Like, that's like the basic stuff that you have to actually know to talk intellectually in those circles. The problem in video games is that we don't really have that equivalent. And yes, people will say, yeah, but like some people say, if you play this game, then you really understand gaming. And I'm not gonna make those arguments. Everyone has their favorites. All games can be incredibly impactful, even if they're simple, like Pong or Mario 64 or Mario Sunshine, and so on and so forth. This is why I hate all anime PFPs. Damn, that got serious. Did you ever? Oh no, wait. How the heck did I see that same thing again? The same question. Do you think modern game design principles are ruining the long-term success of MMOs? Yes, because they're not long-term focused. I don't really know what your point is, Jasuke. Anyone can pick it up. Will it work for the first few times? Like, are you just like the person here to tell everybody that things can fail? Everyone's well aware of that, buddy. Like, nobody needs you to come in with your anime avatar and explain to everybody that things can fail. People understand that. Actually, the whole channel is designed on talking about failures of games. You'd play a Riker game? Dude, if they made that that Star Wars 64 game, what's it called? What's the one called where you run around as like, I don't think you're Han Solo actually. I think you're like some other adventurer who's kind of like Han Solo light. It's not Empire at War, that's the RTS game. What's the other Star Wars game? I'm just saying, I could imagine literally just like turning that character into Riker and it would be like the same fucking game. Box said, exactly. Like, you've said some really good things today, and I think you're paying attention. The way Cryptic used its engine to instance maps and game modes made the game feel too small, with too many load screens. That's the danger of doing such a thing. People might ask, like, well, SWTOR got away with it. SWTOR's approach was actually pretty smart. Now, there's some downsides to it, but they said, okay, well, this is a world up until this point. As soon as you cross this point, this is no longer a world and is now an instance. And this is my world, if you will. I know like there were some issues with it because so much of the content wasn't actually experienced with other players, so like many of us kind of were just confused by that. And the group questing and dungeons were awesome and flashpoints, but there just wasn't enough of them. So I think that SWTOR manages to somehow kind of skate through that a little bit because it still offers places to live. It has your ship. There's some areas in which it has to instance hop, but it feels more natural, right? And I think that that helps the game feel less instanced and more like a world, even though I still have complaints about that with SWTOR 2. I'm just using SWTOR. I feel like it's the best example for Star Trek Online. Behind streaming, it was a bad one. Oh, okay. I think a lot of people argue with you don't realize that your opinions are not equally weighted compared to theirs. You're not their peer, so to say. Yeah, Kiki, and I appreciate you saying that, but I also want to be like very clear in saying that if anyone, no matter what your background or history is, can actually engage with me and prove me wrong, it doesn't matter if you have the history or the background. Like, you guys ever been talking to a kid about something before, like a young kid that's smart, and they actually like end up saying some shit, and you're just like, man, like that's actually some smart shit. Like the kid doesn't even understand how smart that is. Like, because intelligence is a precursor that happens when you're young. Like when you're a young child, you can be smart, which means that you haven't formulated your actual ideas yet, right? Which means you haven't fought in the trenches with your ideas. And to Keiki's point, I think that that's what's lacking with most people that engage with me, is that they haven't actually fought in the trenches with their ideas, both with developers, with players, against the player base, you know, on all sides of the affair. Like, I've been hated by the developers, I've been loved by the developers, the player base has hated me before, the player base has loved me before. I've been on all the different sides because ultimately all I care about is the industry. I care about the games being better. I care about people being paid correctly. I care about developers getting better at their job. I care about players getting what they want, what they expect, and what they desire when they buy a game, a project, or they, you know, look for a game with the title MMO. You know, it's like this very kind of generic thing, but like that's really what I'm interested in and love the most. It's just the industry at large. But in regards to like the opinions not equally weighted thing, that's actually just a societal thing that happens. In exceptional cultures, these are cultures that are not non-collective cultures, which means that they're more individually ego-focused. There's a lot of benefits to that, but the difficulties with that is that whenever you live and operate in a culture where you feel like you must be extraordinary, basically you feel like when you're not extraordinary, you're a loser. So then it creates this unfortunate like pseudo you know, I'm cool or I'm very intelligent kind of perspective that a lot of Americans will adapt, where they don't actually educate themselves. They don't actually learn or read anything and study or whatever else you'd like to insert. And so it becomes this very strong desire. I'm an individual. My perspective matters. I'm a kid. Like, you know, which I believe in strongly. Like, your perspective does matter, but it just doesn't really matter the same as someone else that's clearly more educated or has spent way more time on something than yours. And I think that that's a hard thing for people to hear and understand. But as a martial artist, I get this experience every day because I train with experts in martial arts, which means that like an expert can beat me up. A lot of the time they're taking it easier on me, okay? In order to help me learn. So like that's the process, is I'm very aware of what an expert is and what their capabilities are. I feel it on a daily basis when I'm training. The problem is that I used to feel that way about developers too, but then I realized over time that the player base is what makes developers have to get better, and the player base hasn't made developers get that much better. And I'm not trying to just blame players, I'm trying to blame everybody, but I'm saying that the players can help that equation, right? And, you know, again, for people feeling like, where do you feel like you can say this stuff? A lot of my quotes and my best bits of information are actually literally quotable from the creators of the industry. So it means that like, if you don't feel that I have the authority to say that like games today and the developers today are too simplistic in their designs and creating worlds, how about this? Don't listen to me. Just Google somebody named Richard Bartle. Look at what his qualifications are. He has a PhD in AI and he literally helped create MUDs. And you know, listen to him. Don't listen to me. How about this? The comment that I said about why a theme park game shouldn't ever just be a theme park game. If you feel like I don't have the authority to say that, that's fine. Raph Koster made a video responding to Josh Strife Hayes and me saying that actually they're right. That theme park is this concept. But the thing that they were wrong about, and he's right, is that it was never supposed to just be one or the other. MMOs were never supposed to just be theme parks. It doesn't make fucking sense. They were supposed to exhibit aspects of a theme park and exhibit aspects of a player world. So then why did Star Wars Galaxies not have much of a theme park in it? Because they didn't have a budget. Because they didn't have enough time. Raph has admitted this stuff, guys. Like, And that's the problem is like, it's one thing to not understand an industry or how things function, but it's another thing when people will literally talk about my qualifications, then won't even acknowledge where my qualifications are coming from. Where are my statements coming from? Where are my strong statements coming from? They're coming from literally the creators of the industry. So that's never to say that they can't be wrong, but it's just to say that, like, okay, well, I have 20 years of experience and a lot of games I've tested. I have developers agreeing with me. They have 40 years of 30 or 40 years of experience, have made multiple of these games, and they're saying this. So you can discard me, but you can't discard them, because otherwise you're a fool. So, and that's kind of how I feel about these, intellectual discussions. Past a point, it does matter about your qualifications and what you've done and actually your actual arguments. And sorry, but nobody's really made Richard or Raph ever look like a fool, because you can't. They know more about anyone else. So, like, and I've had conversations with Raph, by the way, where it was very fortunate of me to have that conversation, but they got to tell me that they liked my Star Wars Galaxies video. That's the creator of the game telling me they liked my video and thought I did a good job covering it. So that's how I got that confidence past the point of just being a literal pro and being really good at MMOs. It came from the developers actually saying, huh, you're not just a good player. You know what you're talking about. Anybody is welcome to do that too. You can make your own YouTube channel. You can make your own stream and start espousing ideas and talk about stuff that matters to you. What you'll find is early on, people will feel like they don't care because they don't know who you are. But if your ideas are good enough, they'll stick. People will follow you. So if you're feeling like you have a lot of things to say, it's free to make a channel, it's free to make videos, it's free to put yourself out there. But most people don't really want to do it. It just becomes easier to basically pick on other people to do. And say, oh, well, this person does this, but they don't do this, A rough timeline of when your first game to come out? I mean, since I would probably focus more on the demo stuff, like I said, I would say within 2 years. But like an actual full-fledged game after that, I'm just not sure, because I'm not sure how short I want to make the games. That's not my focus first. It's really developing the core idea and then kind of coming to that conclusion. I find it hard to explore MMOs anymore because data miners ruin the surprise. So I will actually disagree with that, because I think that what that comes from is actually, it goes back to what I was saying. People have FOMO. A strong amount of FOMO. It has dictated all MMOs since the beginning of time. The problem with FOMO is that when people feel like somebody else is getting it before them because they have some kind of unfair advantage or some like secret information, like inside trading or some shit has come out, they're gonna feel cheated. So I understand why people have negative reactions because of data miners. But the truth is that like data miners and video makers and guide makers and exploit explainers and so on, these will always exist. You can never get rid of them. Can't. It's literally what they do. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, these people love and live to do that sort of stuff. So, and they've also existed since the beginning. WowBot and Alakazam are early internet websites in which you could get database information that existed in the early 2000s. So like, it's a common misconception. People feel like because everything is more popular now and public, they feel like, oh, it's happening now. And like data miners and like everyone's just like solving everything too easily. It's like, it was happening back then. It's just more prevalent now. And that creates a bigger problem. I'm not trying to downplay that, but I'm just trying to say that like, don't forget that that's always been one of the biggest motivations behind playing these games in the first place is power gaming. Power gaming is a huge part of MMOs. And I feel like that's just an aspect that people have to kind of come to agreement over. Look at an D&D as a contextual like comparison. In D&D, sometimes people power game. Sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes they just roleplay focus. But in a MMO context, why are you always almost power gaming? It's because literally you're power gaming because you have a progression to reach. You have a boss to kill. see what I'm saying? So there's always that is in your mind, that is what the primary part of the game is focused on, is combat, is fighting, so on and so forth. Yeah, someone mentioned data miners above. I will agree with you, Drowercorn, but I'll also say that like there are many developers that didn't know that that was the case. They didn't know that like how they designed their game, if it was like, you know, cheated a little bit beforehand, or if someone got like a sneak peek, that it could make it incredibly trivial. I don't think some developers truly understand that. And we have to also be accepting of the early developers, because when they were making games, they had no fucking clue. They didn't have all the history. They couldn't look back at 10 years of games and be like, oh, okay, this game's... So when many of those games made mistakes, they had no clue what happened or what was happening. And most of their problems were manifesting in a live environment, as MMOs typically, you know, suffer from. So essentially, they were suddenly being like, wow, our game can just be solved because people could realize that this is this whole process of chronicle. Sorry. The, what do they call it? The holocron system. The holocron system in Galaxies. Raph didn't know at the time. Well, he kind of did, but he got forced to by the publishers, to be fair, because they wanted it to be easier to become a Jedi. But even then, he didn't really know that like that would then make it to where everybody can become a Jedi. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then that would trivialize the game. You're like, he didn't really know that. And so then the question isn't that you make someone like that feel bad. That's never the point of my videos. The point is actually that now, if somebody wants to make a prestige class in the future, they can look at Galaxies and be like, okay, maybe we shouldn't take that approach. Thank you, Diamond. Coconut oil. Mostly. How's it going, Eva? I mean, Jasuke, I get where you're coming from, like, because you're coming more from my perspective regarding data mining, but you also have to acknowledge that some people do feel like the way that I said, like when the mystery's spoiled, that that's just the game, you know, like some people feel that way, and I know that that's your game shouldn't be created for that, but that's more of a problem of the game than the player's expectation from the game. You know what I'm saying? And I get that, Des. I mean, I play COD for that reason. I don't think I just hop on and I just start shooting people. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like there's no thought process going through my head. I'm just like target, shoot, and that's it. So I love playing games like that. How would you go about getting experience to learn to make better long-term MMOs? That's a great question. Are you saying like maybe you want to get involved in development, or just trying to wonder how developers can get better at it in general? What I would say is you need to go back to what we were talking about in the beginning. Start examining the pillars of a world: socialization, ecology, and the economy. Without those, the world won't function. And if you don't want to make a world, that's fine. Just make a game. But don't tell people you're making a world, because that creates actually a bad situation. It's not even good to do that. Like Phantasy Star Online didn't have to pretend to people it was massive, because they made a good game that was a world anyway. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I think it's also just breaking this stereotype of feeling like everything has to be massive. Because if we don't want to make a long-term MMO, we don't have to be massive. You see what I'm saying? We can be short-term focused. It's easier even when it's with a smaller world. But I would say, of course, studying the old long-term MMOs that have been around. EverQuest, Asheron's Call, Ultima Online, EVE Online, WoW, Lineage, MapleStory, Ragnarok Online, RuneScape, whichever iteration you prefer, and Tibia. You know, games like that. Like I would study the OGs, like, and kind of see like how they were able to keep people coming in and playing the game for many years. Because if they solely had the theme park approaches, I promise you guys right now, they wouldn't have been able to do it. The theme park approach is not sustainable. There's a reason that WoW and Final Fantasy XIV have massive drops in population, despite anybody wanting to talk about that kind of stuff. But it happens every expansion. the information's trackable. I put it in my video even. It's because the content's done. Nothing else to do in those games or worlds. So if there were more to do and more of a world to service, then that game wouldn't have that same problem. But, you know, I've explained many times why Final Fantasy XIV was the game that they created. It's because Yoshi P made a brilliant decision to stop trying to make something new and save a game instead of just, you know, tanking a project, basically. It's not like he could have taken another risk, right? With a project that already failed. He took the smartest approach and from a business perspective, copied the most popular game, and then used his best assets and Final Fantasy's best assets to make it better. And that was genius in its own right. And that's basically, you know, what WoW did to EverQuest, right? And I mean, you know, sort of. Yoshi P copied a lot more than WoW did, but regardless, was able to create just as an effective and successful effect. But just like Yoshi P is well aware of, and has literally told his fan base, don't keep playing my game once you're done with the content because you'll get burnt out, is that he understands that that's how the game's structured. And it's crazy to me that the player base is largely okay with it. So up until they're not, they will be okay with that theme park approach. But what happens as new theme parks start to come out? Can Final Fantasy XIV compete against them if they're the same kind of game, but just play better? Actually, not really. That's the problem that WoW's suffering from. The reason that WoW is getting beat up so bad by Final Fantasy XIV is one word: story. It's just story. Like, I know it's an oversimplification, but it's story. Story is why they're beating so bad. Nobody cares about the WoW story anymore, just about. And Final Fantasy is all about the story. So they've managed to beat WoW by essentially only focusing on one core aspect, which is storytelling. And of course, that comes with the dungeons and the raids and the trials and the expansions and the world zones and so on and so forth. It's not just reading or something, but you get what I'm saying. So to understand how to make a better long-term MMO, you have to understand how to make something better long-term. And you have to also understand how to reinvent a world in a way that can keep things exciting and keep people coming back. What I think is the most important thing for that, and then I'll move on to another question because I don't want to go too, because it's a really deep thing I can get into, is creating a world that people remember. That's the problem that so many worlds suffer from. Final Fantasy XI is a great example of this. It has a massive world that nobody traverses anymore, because after you traverse it for the zones that you go to, you don't go back. So think about that from a developer perspective. That's why theme park MMOs aren't sustainable. And Raph has said this as well, by the way, in the video that I mentioned that he responded to Josh and I. Because Josh and I both believe strongly that theme park MMOs are not sustainable. They're not. Raph feels the same way. And it's because of that reason. There's not enough reason to keep coming back just for the sake of playing the game without getting a constant content injection into it. So it's the solution in that respect is build theme park content and build sandbox content and put it together. Which one you want to focus on is up to you, of course. What kind of game do you want to create? But there's really not really a benefit in just focusing on one. Like, what's the number one concept or complaint you hear in a sandbox game? I don't know what the fuck to do. Theme park content. Da-da-da, solution. Da-da-da. It's, you know what I'm saying? It's like not that complicated in that respect. The theme park games, man, it's so boring. I don't know what to do until the next content comes out. Sandbox content. You see why like Raph believes in that so much is because they always service each other and they both keep the world functioning. But if you only focus on the theme park parts, your world's not going to last. It's just not going to, because you won't let it. Shadows of the Empire. Man, I'm far behind in chat, but yes. Trunk sponges. Yeah, ZB is right. You can read Bartle's books. They're very accessible. In fact, I would say that Bartle's books for a PhD in AI are incredibly approachable for any level of like decent intelligence. And then I'll go a step further to say that, like, if you prefer fun reading content, Raph has, you know, no offense, Richard, but I think more fun content to read. But yeah, I mean, Richard has 2 textbooks on the industry that I've read already that really nobody else has. And also has a book that literally talks about how to even create a world. It's called How to Be a God. Literally own the book. Like, I'm a huge fan of reading the best materials I can read, and that's why it goes back to, if you want to hear about where you should be learning from, or what information you can get that's not from me, that's where I'm getting it. You can skip me and go straight to that, but you can't skip that because you're skipping literally like the experts of the industry. Like, it anyway. Opinions on Jake's Song as a developer. I would say that he's the grandfather of the entire KRMMO scene, given his involvement in every major KRMMO. Keiki, I agree. In fact, if you're in chat right now, I've never had a bad word to say about you, except that you're a little bit too damn good at making games that make money. But anyway, Jake's Song is he's a Richard Bartle and Raph Koster. In fact, I think if I were to talk to them about Jake's Song, they would talk about him in reverence. When I spoke to Richard Garriott spoke to Jake's Song like he was a wonder child. So that's another genius looking at another genius saying, this guy's fucking smart. So yeah, Jake's Song is a genius. Not just talented, he's a genius. Has created some of the most impactful, innovative MMOs in the world. Not just in Korea, in the world. But yes, is definitely the godfather of the Korean MMO scene. So yeah, like, if you are a regular here, you know I talk a lot about Jake's Song, actually. He's probably one of the most, like, if you look at like an MMO track record for a developer, he probably has the best resume. I mean, literally, like, he's the Chris Avalon of MMOs. Like, who has a better track record than that? That had that much influence, to specify. Because I know some developers who've worked on all the major projects, which is pretty badass, but they worked in smaller aspects. This guy made the games. Like, I don't know if people even understand how crazy of a concept that is. He made one of the first MMOs ever, or sorry, was a developer on one of the first MMOs ever, then made one of the second MMOs ever, one of the most successful MMOs ever, Lineage, then went and made one of the most innovative games ever, and best graphically and gameplay game that we've seen in many cases, like Arcade. Like, it's just, yeah, anyway. And the first game I was talking about was Nexus of Wind of Change. I can't, sorry for my Eastern fans. I always forget what that game's name is, because it's like the first Korean MMO, and it was not very known. So I always forget that damn name. It's on the timeline. Ooh, the timeline is another thing that I always suggest to people. BioBreak WordPress / MMO-timeline. All right, I'm gonna link that here. So this is really what I recommend for you guys if you want to be able to follow like the correct information on when games come out. How do you know that I know when they come out, or remember? It's from checking that timeline. It's like the best timeline. Yeah, and sometimes it's better just to not have a plan and just go. But I get what you're saying in that respect. Mick Farline, you single-handedly re-sparked my love for gaming. Wow, that's a... And if you're lying, you got me good, but if not, thank you. That's a really nice thing to say. I'm gonna be heading out here soon, guys, because I'm still not feeling very well, and I want to go finish writing Gwent. The problem is that old games make mistakes, it's that the newer ones recreate. Exactly. I'm afraid you will really have to make a death of a game for Rainbow Six Extraction. Over the year the game was released, Ubisoft ignored it and is only reprising it. Yeah, I've heard people mentioning that. Interesting. I'll look at it. Diamond for it. I don't care. We could talk about hair. We could talk about whatever. Really, like the podcast is to talk about whatever. It's just that, like, you know, if people want to take time out of their day, in my head, I'm like, you probably want to talk about the things that I'm like more of an expert in, right? Like martial arts, or we can talk about video games. Not a whole lot else that I'm ever going to call myself anything close to an expert in. So, but we can also just talk about random shit. You know, I don't care. We can talk about music, movies. I'm not an expert. I just like them. Yeah, well, sorry, Zero. I actually want to add a little bit of correction to that. You said that Final Fantasy XIV devs are fully aware that they're incapable of creating a world that could keep players playing for a long time. They're aware of that within Final Fantasy XIV. But I'd like to add the caveat that they are absolutely capable of doing that in another game. Like, Yoshi P has said before, literally, he wants to create a sandbox game that feels more like it actually requires roleplay characters and actors. The problem is he said that he needs a business strategy to do that and enough time in order to be able to pull it off. At the moment, with Square Enix literally failing every video game not Final Fantasy XIV, my theory on this, and I've told people this, I think they're going to hold him hostage. I feel bad for the guy. I think he's going to be stuck on Final Fantasy XIV until they run that game into the ground. I don't know. I have this weird feeling about that. I'm not saying that they've always done that. They will take their producers and put them on other projects and stuff, but it just feels like they're just like, you know what, Yoshi P, we're just going to park you on Final Fantasy XIV. And I can't help but feel like that's a bad thing. This guy is another world talent. You should give him the ability to create a Final Fantasy game as a sandbox, because then you won't have that problem of your game not lasting long anymore. But anyway, I would love to see Yoshi P make that game. The guy's favorite games are EVE Online and Ultima Online. You're telling me he couldn't make a sandbox MMO? I think if he could actually combine his whole focus on story elements with that, it would be fucking incredible. Still find it funny that Final Fantasy XIV has a formula for success and Squeenix ignores it, trying to push the Western style games as the service games that fail. Yeah, everyone talks to me about that, Boxhead. I don't really know how to explain it either, how to like talk about it. Like, if it's just because Final Fantasy XIV has so many OGs on it that they just can, because they saved Square in so many cases, that it's just like they just let them do their thing. I don't fucking know, but their business strategy can't feel any more different. They want to make a bunch of single player games and make them all online. It's like, why not just make another MMORPG then? Like, you literally have Final Fantasy XIV. Why not just make another game like that? If that's what you want. But it's like you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You want to make a single player game that requires people to purchase it. But then nobody's purchasing it because they don't want to buy a fucking game as a service that doesn't have any content that's going to get abandoned again, which has happened now twice with Square Enix. Not counting the mobile games they've been. So it's just like, I don't understand that company. Well, yeah, and that's the other point I was going to make, Des, is that Final Fantasy XIV, the weird part about it is that not only is it a Western game, it has a Western audience. Like, let me reiterate this. No Eastern MMO that is widely successful is like, literally, guys, this is crazy. Think about this. There is no single Eastern MMO that has ever appealed more to the West and been more of a Western focused title than Final Fantasy XIV. Literally doesn't exist. I think that's so interesting with how much people talk about Japanese MMOs and Japanese online games. It's like, where? Where are they? Where are the Japanese MMOs? Where are they? They don't really exist, guys. Westerners are calling. They don't call them. They don't call Animal Crossing an MMO. On Final Fantasy XIV's main webpage in Japanese, they don't even call it an MMO at all. I think that's the Western obsession. That's so interesting to me. WoW was built on the promise of no expansion. Interesting. I'd have to get a source on that. That's really like interesting to me. And then rant about Jedi Survivor. Only thing is you can't really play Life is Feudal without a group, so it's either be social or beef. But that's because medieval games are more like that. And I think people don't like to admit that about medieval style games, but like think about medieval conflicts and medieval like, you know, ways of traveling. Like that's more of how it was. So I'm not saying that's a good thing necessarily, but I think it makes sense given that context. Where people get annoyed is when they're playing a sci-fi game or a fantasy game and suddenly it's like, the only way I can progress is to play with this other group. Meaning period throughout the entirety of the game. You know, the more like Guild Wars 1 approach, but you can't use bots. You know, players don't want that. They want the ability to be able to do it on their terms, which means that they both want to be able to play with players and not play with players. The problem is that you have a large amount of antisocial people and players telling other players how to design games. And that's incredibly problematic. I've talked about that before, but it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about, is to not let antisocial game development be the future. It'll ruin the space. I'm telling you, it's only a road to ruin. Because MMOs don't have better gameplay than any other game. They don't have better graphics. They don't have better story. They don't have really anything better besides the world itself. So if we take the world itself out, the socialization, the permanence, the progression, the long-term stuff, we're gonna get beat by everybody else. See what I'm saying? That's why I'm so strong about that. Don't make antisocial games. Don't make them, please. Josh has talked about this before too. Don't design the game for a player who doesn't want to play with other players, but design content for a player who doesn't to still enjoy the game. That can be done. It's been done for many, many years. RuneScape built an entire game off of it. So I think we just need to get back to that old line of thinking in that respect. Your recommendation for Richard Bartle is the Theory of Fun. I think Theory of Fun's good because it's a lot more digestible. But if you really want to understand how these games are built from a literal textbook perspective, just read his textbooks. Literally, he explains everything. Thank you, Crazy Eights. You're absolutely right. I should probably shut up and just go right. Because, yeah, the voice. What do I think of Final Fantasy XIV's housing crisis and community's response to it? So I've actually had responses to this before, but I'll respond again. My perspective on this is actually interesting. It's housing markets are supposed to have crises, essentially, because they're battles of demand. And in a world of limited spaces, which is unless you just give people more apartments, which why didn't Final Fantasy XIV do that? For a reason. Because if they do that, then there isn't a world. There's no such thing as a world that exists with infinite apartments. We just walk inside an apartment, hit the button, and then boom, there's just like a million people in one apartment. It doesn't exist, right? So you actually have to have your own place, your own space, your own place of mass, etc., occupying a world. And so a housing crisis will always exist because a housing crisis exists in the real world. I think that's something that people need to realize, that worlds are supposed to mimic the real world, just not one-to-one. But there are going to be things that they're not different, guys. Housing is in demand and is limited. There will always be crises surrounding it. Now, to get specific in the housing bubble in Final Fantasy XIV, it's more problematic because it's more of like first come, first serve. There's large amounts of money. These are the only housings that you can actually have and live in. So there's more complaints about it from that respect. But the reason why I kind of seem like I'm a little bit tongue-in-cheek is because sandbox games have that problem times a million. Like, Star Wars Galaxies had to introduce taxes to people. And even then, they didn't have the best system to account for players just AFKing and never playing the game again. So, yeah, it's, you know, I don't have like direct solutions because there really isn't a solution to a housing crisis in a sense. Except increasing amount of house, the amount of houses. lowering the increasing the supply, right? But then you have to compromise your world. And if for people wondering why they don't just do it, that's why. Yeah, and that's where the problems come in Zero Sins. The same thing happened in ArcAge. Bots got into the game in ArcAge and Black Desert Online and immediately were buying plots of land. You design your game like that for first come, first serve. Don't add in a week period, time period where you don't allow people to claim plots. There's so many little things that you can do in different directions that if you don't do them, it's done. As soon as it's out, it's done. The system's gone. It's inflated past repair. And that's the hard thing about MMOs is that that happens so quickly that you have to constantly be on your toes as a developer and changing shit. You can't just be like, well, it's out of our hands. It's like, don't let them ruin your game, bro. Go fix it. Since Final Fantasy XIV is fronting the bills for other game failures, Avengers Babylon's Fall, we won't get another live service MMO. I truly feel that way too, Meatman Media. And I'm sorry, guys, to be that. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. They said that we're not going to get another Yoshi P MMO anytime soon, or a Square Enix MMO, or a Final Fantasy MMO anytime soon. But we're not, because it's their cash cow. And they're going to take the same approach that WoW did, even though it didn't work for WoW in the long term, but it worked for them in the short term, which is just milk it as much as you can on the theme park content without any exit plan. I feel like if I could sit down and talk to Yoshi P behind closed doors, because maybe he wouldn't admit this for employer reasons, and just say, man, hey, just level with me, brother. You want to escape this shit so you can go make a fucking amazing game. Because that's the thing is, I'm sitting here, people can say, you hate Final Fantasy 4. Final Fantasy is one of my favorite franchises. I've played the RPGs more than most of you. I played them on PC. I played them on PlayStation. I played the Steam, cracked versions with the fucking artifacting, like Final Fantasy 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. I'm a massive Final Fantasy fan, so don't call my nerd credentials into question just because I don't like one particular game or how it's structured or so on and so forth. That being said, you're telling me that I wouldn't be excited for another MMO made by Yoshi fucking P? Are you kidding me? Of course I would. You'd see the hype come out of me that you don't see that much, where I get excited about games. That would come out of me because there's a talented guy with a talented team who knows what he's doing. And he's played these games. He's actually played EVE Online and Ultima. Something that so many MMO developers are lacking. They don't actually fucking play the games. Yoshi did. And that was one of his biggest reverse Uno cards. He actually understood the industry because he played the games. He didn't just look at them. He didn't just watch them. Be like, okay, that's what they do. Which is like the Western approach. He's gonna be on Final Fantasy 14 till the wheels fall off. Yeah. Hey. Yes, more Somp. That's a great point. If Yoshi P does well with Final Fantasy 16, that could be his escape card. That could be it. He could use that as a way to like fucking transition into making another title, maybe a hybrid title, maybe Final Fantasy co-op or some shit. I mean, I'm on Final Fantasy 16. I'm rooting for it even more now. When do you think you'll be comfortable tackling WoW Death of a Game? Yes, it's still the most popular MMO, but relative to its own success, it's plummeted and barely a shadow of its former self. I'm just gonna give a cliche answer and just say more. They're still trying to make the game, and it's still doing pretty successful. Yeah, well, some styles of games aren't just gonna be your thing, Jeg. I think that it's just okay to admit that sometimes, Like the very anime focused games I'm not really interested in those games. So I can understand that. I really gotta play Final Fantasy 14 someday. I have the base game in Stormblood, but I just haven't A very long time for them to expand per character limit once and changed over the lottery system. Still rig the odds. The combat being like Devil May Cry has me very hyped. Yeah, me too. I prefer that style of combat system, which I wonder how that's going to affect Yoshi P looking at MMOs going. Like, I wonder if he would still go back and be like, you know what? Because I'll just come out and say this. I think if you asked Yoshi P, like with the fucking Shinigami on his shoulder or some shit, so he has to answer it properly. Like, yo, would you make your next MMO, or if you could change like Final Fantasy XIV's combat, would you? I literally feel like there's no argument that he wouldn't. Except if the argument would be basically, well, I have to make sure that it works on consoles as well. It's like, okay, well, fair enough. You'll have to probably lower the delays, add some, you know, delay or whatever else in some fashion to be able to be playable on cross-platform. But you're telling me it would be a 3.5 second GCD? Get the out of here with that shit. You're telling me he would make a 3.5 second GCD? Come on. Ah, they hired the same combat developer. Interesting. Well, y'all are making me excited to go finish Final Fantasy 14 or 15, because as embarrassing as it is, I never finished that one. I never finished 14 either, but I didn't even get far at all in 15. I just stayed so far away from it for so long, and you know, no particular reason. Partly I try to avoid the hype sometimes, but I think it was also just you know, I couldn't find the space and time to do it. But all right, I'm gonna be heading out. I'm gonna give you guys 2 more minutes to get any questions in, and I mean, I will be heading out, so I will be. Well, I played Final Fantasy 15, but I just didn't beat it. And I think it was just I just could not find the time to play it, you know? Like, I got to one of the early sequences, you know, and the game is a little bit slower to start, which I like, but I was just, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. Probably a problem with me, you know? Maybe I just need to add more focus sessions for playing single-player games or something like that. Would it be fair to say that an anime-focused Star Trek Online by Cryptic Entertainment would not be your #1 MMORPG? Yes, it'd be safe to say that. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. My cousin did beat it though, and I beat 13, which is weird. Like, why did I play 13 but not play 15? What the heck is wrong with me? Pretty weird. And I hate some of the characters in 13. Literally hate them. Like, I don't just dislike some of those characters. I hate them. True, I guess it could just come down to timing. You know, maybe it was that simple. Just timing. Might not have more time. I don't think I was doing my YouTube stuff back then. I feel the same way, Hyperborean, but you gotta think. Theme park MMO developers, when they're succeeding, they have no incentive to really not do it anymore, except long term. So meaning that as long as they can continue to milk as much as they can, they don't see a reason to not keep doing that. There is a reason. The reason is that you lose market share. The reason is that now people forget about your IP more, and that now competition starts to come out and do better. So the problem in Final Fantasy XIV and not doing that won't bite them in the ass in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It'll be more like, wow, it'll take them a while to actually bite them in the ass. I would say it took a while, probably, what, like 10 years? Maybe a little bit less, but like, it took a while, like almost 10 years for it to start to really incur the problems of its approaches. Think about how much success they got before then. So it's just like, that's why it's hard to ever be like, yeah, but the long term, it's bad. It's like, yeah, but they'll make so much money in the short term. That's what they're focused on. The question is more so what happens after the wheels start falling off, because they always do. That's what I start to ask. And I asked that with WoW before this recent expansion, but they managed to impress. And if they can keep doing that, they can bring some of those players back, but for how long? And those questions become more and more serious as better competitors get introduced into the space. One of the biggest important reasons why these games can get away with this still, because there isn't enough competition. It's just that simple, right? Like imagine, Final Fantasy XIV is almost 10 years old. Imagine we go 10 years back and Mass Effect 2 or Mass Effect 3 is still the standard for an RPG. It's like, we would feel like, man, is that really the best that we could do? We can do better than those games? We have done better than that. As I know, Witcher, fucking God of War, blah, 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 all these other games like people love, have done better. Or done more RPG aspects or whatever. I'm not saying that they're your favorite games. I know opinions and all. I'm just saying, like, we can look back at every genre and be like, wow, they made marked improvements. Look at the RPGs here. Look at the shooters here. Look at the story games here. The MMO industry is one of the few that you can look at it and literally be like, what the fuck? There's games from 15 years ago that are still doing things better than games that came out 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Like, what? And it's because of the shit that we've been talking about. It's so complicated. It's not simple. Despite me trying to make it seem like it's simple to make it easier to understand, but it's not. But it's just unfortunate, right? Like, as a genre, we look back and we're just like, you can still see the rear view that close and it still looks pretty good. So it's like, I feel like that's the next thing we need to start changing as an industry, is let's actually start getting better than these games that were before. And that's what I'm hoping Final Fantasy XIV and WoW has contributed to in some way, is a better theme park game will come out and outperform those games. But will it just be a theme park game? Who knows? But when that happens, those games will die quickly. I think that's the thing that people aren't really exposed to because they haven't lived in the age of where games were coming out like that and there was competition. For a theme park game, people switch to the next one. There's little loyalty to those games, guys. Think about that. If I'm a Final Fantasy fan and they came out with a new Final Fantasy game, why would I not join that game? You know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't I guess? Because I like Final Fantasy 14, cool, but I like Final Fantasy. I'm gonna go play the new Final Fantasy game. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, anyway. Actually, after I said I was gonna wait a few minutes, it's only been a few. But maybe you meant from Earth. I don't want to see a game get milked to the point of being hated, but that's the thing that I hate why players just excuse it so much. Is that if the game doesn't actually have an upward trajectory, it will just start doing it. And maybe for some people that's okay, but yeah, and there's a lot more that goes into that box set, but give or take, yeah. I feel that the hype cycle of influence streamers now can straight hype up, or can straight up accelerate how quickly a new MMO gets chewed up and swallowed. Maybe, but again, good games, better games, that stuff doesn't really matter. Should all MMOs be never-ending games with new expansions and not profitable? No, because that is one style of content. You can do both. Final Fantasy as a world could exist where you could walk around, check out people's houses, fight world bosses in on different maps and different planets or whatever, or different areas, and then go do the dungeons, and then go do the raids, and then go do the trials. What if I told you you could actually do both? You could. It's just that we keep getting fed games that are only doing one because they're way easier to do and don't take as much innovation to approach. So that's what I will leave everybody on, is like, imagine if we had Final Fantasy XIV, but like Raf Koster says, MMOs and virtual worlds were originally supposed to be designed with both aspects. What if it had both aspects? It does feel a lot more like an endless game, when you think about it like that, because you're like, well, of course the structured content will slow down or come to an end at some point. It always does. But then you still have all that world to explore. So That's the sad thing about games like Final Fantasy 14 and WoW is the versions of WoW that are the most played are the most world aspects of it, right? Like meaning after the game was shut down, the old servers were funked. Those versions of the servers are still very popular for those reasons. Will the same be the case for modern WoW or Final Fantasy 14? Here's what I'm going to say. No. I think that they'll be useful in a going through a museum type of fashion. But the worlds will never be the same, and the games will never function in the same way. But you'll be able to go back to them and experience the story content again if they allow us to preserve these games, please. You'd still be able to do that kind of stuff. But I'm saying like you'd never be able to go back and experience what it was like to play Final Fantasy 14 because the world isn't there anymore, even though it was barely there in the first place. Whereas players that go back and play classic WoW can still experience that. See what I'm saying? That's the longevity and legacy of titles that are only focused on one particular aspect. There's not much legacy, actually. They're forgotten about in a lot of cases. Like the memory of the game is important because it's significant, but in terms of like how it affects the actual industry, how much is it remembered? Look at EverQuest. Was EverQuest the most successful game ever? No, it actually wasn't even orders of magnitude as successful as many of the games out now. But why is it still considered so fucking useful as a game and impactful? Because it took the Deku Mud approach, like Maghorn's talking about, and made that into a graphical MMO. That wasn't really done yet. So it's just crazy, this industry. So young, yet so old at the same time. It feels like it's so juvenile, you know, in that how slow it's taking for us to make certain changes in movements. But hey, at least we'll all grow old while it's happening. I'm just kidding, but anyway. I think it depends on the developer and the company more so. Like if you would ask me, if I would make an MMO, I would always make it with the intention of ending it. I don't really understand the obsession of keeping worlds going. In fact, it's besides just not understanding how a world functions or profit reasons, I don't really see a whole lot of reasons for doing it. And I explain. I would do a live content cycle on my game. Then after the live content cycle is over, the game would be finished. You could still play the game, go back and play the old content, but you'd never experience the game in the same way anymore. And then I'd make a new one. And I would keep trying to do that. But that's me. And that's because I believe in progress. I believe in building the next game that's cooler and bigger and newer versus just continuing to redo the same thing over and 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 over. Is not really what I find as much interest in. So I think that if some developers would take that approach, we'd have a lot more risky and unique titles come out too, because they wouldn't be worried about them lasting for 5, 6, 7 years. They only needed to last for just a couple years. You're immortal. Fair enough. Yeah, Meat Man. That's usually what it is, especially from a power progression perspective. Verticality is much easier to introduce, but is also very damning and very abrupt, you know? Because it's like suddenly this new armor set came out and it trivializes everything versus like horizontal progression where it's like this new zone came out and this new armor piece is useful, but it's useful because it offers comparable usefulness with different aspects that are unique, not just a straight power increase every single time. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna head out because I'm feeling pretty fucking tired. I didn't eat much. Obviously, been my other. All right, I will talk to you guys later. I will see y'all later in the week. Stay tuned for the Death of a Game Gwent to come out in the next month or a week. God, I'm so brain dead. I'm adding another 3 weeks. But anyway, yeah. So within a week, you'll hear, see, watch, hopefully the Gwent video. After the Gwent video, I told you there's a special video coming. A requested video. Somebody paid me to do this video. Which is really fucking cool and exciting because it's such a cool video that I've been wanting to do. It's just crazy how life works that way. Where it's like, this is a game that was in my childhood. My best friend played it all the time. I was always around it and hearing about it. Admiring the movement in it and just how unique. I've still never seen a game like the game I'm talking about is Guns Duel. So Guns Duel is going to be the next. Yes, Pixie's Kitty. This is uploaded to my stream channel, which is located on my associated channels on my page, or just look up 6 Pixels under podcast. Yeah, Guns. Guns is going to be exciting. I'm excited to do Guns. Again, it's had a lot of personal significance to me, even though it was never like my favorite game. It was just always around, you know? Just always saw ads, people playing it, you know, it was just same thing as Ragnarok Online. It's like one of those games where it was Maple Story is another one where it always existed in my childhood. I just never dig into those games myself. But so excited to cover them. Right. All right, see you later, Magister, Das, Zero Sens, Pixie, ZB, TD, what up? Yeah, Meatman Media, everybody else that I missed. Peace out. Nerd Slayer out. Oh yeah, question everything.